So now we're going to jump over, appreciate that again, Rob, jump over to Oliver. Oliver's going to talk about the edit suite, connecting your suite to the outside world, sharing, things like that, teams, right?
Yep.
Jump right in. Why don't you take it over, Oliver? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I've been editing for about 5 decades at this point. Not quite, but close. Sort of editor slash colorist slash workflow guy. Right now, I'm freelancing at a shop that's got shared storage and multiple editors. And like a lot of people, most of us are working from home. I actually have been going back into the office for the last few weeks, but it's a very, very low staffing at this point. So obviously the question is, how do you work remotely? And that means different things to different people. So obviously the easiest thing is SneakerNet, right? I ship a drive to an editor somewhere else. He works on a cut. You use review and approval sites, could be Frame.io, could be Whipster, could be as simple as Vimeo. They also have that functionality. And you get client approval. When it's done, you ship the drive or a master or something else. So that's the easiest, and that's probably the way most people are working. Where you get into issues is if you need to tap into your existing plant. So in our case, we have probably close to 700 terabytes of shared storage. Not all of that's filled, but quite a lot of that is a library of legacy footage. And when we shoot, we tend to shoot 4K. It's ProRes or some higher quality medium. And we're most of the time working in Premiere. And so we need to be able to work essentially at online quality, right? Native resolution, no proxy workflow, et cetera. And that's how we normally work in the shop. Basically, everything is available to us at all times. Well, when COVID hit, the first thing was, okay, how do we deal with this? One of the things we normally do is we archive all of our stuff. So in addition to it living on the server, it also lives on backup drives. So for a while, I had about 50 drives sitting behind me on the floor. And as we had updates to projects, it was, okay, I got to load this in, whatever. Not the most efficient way, but it worked for us.
There's my drives back there.
Yeah.
Nice shelf.
Yep.
Almost 100.
Yeah, we're about the same. We have a whole backup routine for storage in addition to whatever we do on the server. So, one of the things that I've been interested in is all the various solutions for remote access, true remote access. So first of all, there's a lot of discussion of editing in the cloud. Unfortunately, doing that with high-res media at native resolutions is probably unrealistic for most people. Because if you look at the cost of inexpensive storage like AWS or whatever, that's really meant to be deep storage. It's not meant to be something you put up there, you retrieve the next day, because there are egress charges in addition to the just long-term storage charges. We had a travelogue series where in a week and a half of shooting, the guys would come back with 30 terabytes of media. So you're not going to put that up in the cloud on any kind of reasonable timetable with the internet connections that are generally available. So different strategies. So one thing, if you look at, there are a number of solutions where you can work from home and drill into the media that lives on your server and work in sort of a real-time experience. But usually they require kind of a dedicated silo, right? You've got Avid has their solution with Avid Remote and also Avid Cloud, but that really requires buying Avid Storage, buying Media Central, buying Media Composer to do that. So that may be something a network would look into, but it's probably not going to be what a small shop would look into. The one that seems to be getting a lot of attention is what HP originally marketed as, I believe, RGS. I think it's now being marketed as Z-Boost, but it's essentially your computer at home talks to a computer at work, and that computer in turn shared storage. So in a sense, it's a much more sophisticated version of TeamViewer, let's say, where you can use TeamViewer to tap into a computer at a long distance, and you're essentially remote controlling that computer. And then whatever that computer is capable of, you can do over TeamViewer, but it's not the most responsive process. What the HP solution does is makes that much more responsive. The downside is it's largely Windows only, and it's largely HP oriented. You can have client systems that are now Mac, but the workstation that's being driven always has to be a Windows machine, and for their solution has to be one of the high-end, HPs. Part of the problem in doing this with a Mac environment is you have limitations in what the OS allows, and that's why a lot of these solutions tend to be very Windows oriented as opposed to Mac oriented. So if you eliminate the media solution, right, and you're just talking about a couple of editors collaborating on the same project, then it becomes a little easier to solve that problem. So let's say you ship drives around and everybody's got mirrored media. So I've got a drive, all the folders are named the same way. The drive itself is probably named the same way. Another editor across town or in a different city has the exact same configuration. Now we can either email project files, put them on Dropbox and share them that way, or you can go through a number of actual remote collaboration. So Adobe has what they call team projects, where it's a cloud hosted project, and it's not just Premiere, but it's Premiere, After Effects, and Prelude. So it becomes a shared project that encompasses all of those applications. The downside is that everybody that collaborates has to be on the same Adobe team account. So Rob and I would not be able to collaborate using team projects because we're on different Adobe accounts. And you have to be a team customer or an enterprise customer to have that available to you. So if you're a single Adobe user, that's not even available. The one that I've started to look at and seems to be the most cost-effective, easy way is a product called PostLab. So PostLab was originally developed by a Dutch broadcaster for in-house use, primarily working with Final Cut 10. So the guys that developed it decided to commercialize the product. So they broke away from being an in-house department, teamed up with Hedge that makes the backup software. Hedge basically acquired that, and they released it as PostLab. Now, PostLab initially was a Final Cut 10 oriented product. It has since evolved to being FCP and Premiere. They're extending it now to Resolve, and they're also hopeful of doing something with Media Composer. What PostLab does is the project lives on PostLab servers, right? And you log in let's say you start a project. You start by creating the project, it gets uploaded to the server. Now, every time you work on the project, you check in and check out of that server. So if anybody's worked with the old Final Cut server setup and Final Cut Classic, that used a similar method, right? It lived on the server and you checked it out, worked on it, checked it back in. Well, PostLab works in a similar concept. So if I'm working on a project, an editor across town can't work on that project simultaneously, but they can check it out in a read-only fashion. So that's an option. But more something like maybe I'm working on segment 1, somebody else is working on segment 2, and we can divide up the job that way. Now, initially, that still required mirrored media. They've since added a product called Drive, so PostLab Drive. And basically, every account has access to Drive, but you have to buy the amount of storage or subscribe to the amount of storage you're going to use, starting with 1 terabyte and going up. Now, the way it works is a lot like SmartSync on Dropbox. So, yes, you could work with full res media, but what you really want to do is probably work with proxy media. Maybe one editor has all of the high res media, generates proxies, and the proxies are written to the drive volume that lives on your machine. And like Dropbox, it then syncs up to the cloud. Now, what happens at the other end when somebody goes to access that media, it plays in real time off the cloud. As it's playing, it's caching to their local drive. So the minute you've played the media through, it's now been cached locally, and obviously it's much more responsive. So that way you could have a team of, half a dozen different editors working on pieces of a project, and only one person really needs to have the full res media. Or maybe you start with proxies and in the meantime ship drives. So that's probably the most realistic solution for most, smaller shops and even bigger shops. I mean, there's no reason that there's a limitation. And it could also be a method of shared storage within the same company. Let's say you have editors on the first floor and a different team on the 10th floor. Yeah, you could do that as everybody connected to the same shared storage, but maybe you don't have that luxury. And essentially the cloud becomes the sort of conduit in between.
If I could talk about this a little bit, some of the issues I've seen with any of the sharing is, one of the things is everybody wants to have the same project open at the same time. So I'm editing in a sequence and you're editing the sequence at the same. I don't know how anybody thinks that's possible, that software could do that. That's number one.
Well, Avid does it.
We share.
Avid does it.
I think you can't have the same sequence open though, right? You can have the same project.
No, well, Avid is bin locking. So
yeah.
whoever opens the bin first has write authority. Anybody else has read authority to that.
Early bird gets the sequence. The other issue that I've had with, sharing projects around and, Rob, this, we send a project back and forth, is just keeping track of all these little add-ons, little plugins, little things that you installed that are in this project, and then you get the expression error, or you get some people will have like an element that they didn't realize they brought into the project off their desktop, and they didn't realize it never went out to, and that just, tracking that thing down is like, oh, that's on Bill's desktop of his laptop because he came in last night and he's on a plane, and you're like, you gotta be kidding.
That's where you slap the wrist multiple times until people finally learn.
Well, exactly. There's a more rigid environment that you have to create if you're going to set that up, because there are too many things that can go wrong. One broken font, or like I said, a plugin or an asset can just grind everything to a halt. Except the one guy's editing away, so I'm not having any problems.
Yeah. Well, the common thing if you're going to share stuff between systems is you got to have a consistent set of plugins. You got to have a consistent set of fonts that you're using. And there's also another wrinkle that's particularly an issue with Premiere, and that is LUTs. So if you
Oh,
use
God, yeah.
LUTs
Yes.
and you actually embed them into the common folder that's in Premiere's, library structure, the order of those LUTs changes as you add more LUTs to the folder.
Yep.
And if, I've got whatever, Canon, C-Log, something,
Mhm.
and it's the fourth or fifth choice down, and somebody else has that LUT, but it's like the sixth or seventh choice down, it comes up wrong on his
Yes.
system.
Yeah, I had footage that was all orange, and I said, "What were they doing with this color correction?"
Yeah.
And the LUT name was, I think even the LUT, I couldn't figure it out until I changed different LUT, and then went back and then changed it back to the LUT that I thought it was, and then everything settled back in, and I had
Yeah.
to do that for every single clip.
Yeah, there are certain things like that that are definite gotchas, and where it tends to be, I tend to find that it's less of an issue with editors because they've been burned by it enough times. It's more of an issue if you happen to have a director or a company owner who occasionally edits, and it's like, oh, let me take a swipe at this and do my creative thing. And then you get that project back, and it's like,
And you
oh my
say, "No,
gosh.
Marty, no, Marty, I'm going to cut this one."
Yeah. Or the sequence size is some oddball sequence size.
Oh yeah, yeah. Check your sequence size if it comes from someone else to make
Yeah.
sure it's not. What in the world?
But another interesting side of this is grading. How do you deal with remote color correction? Um, and nobody's got a really solid handle on that unless you're in like a real um, high-end grading environment. DaVinci has set up that's a remote grade, but it really requires mirrored systems. And obviously, if you're judging based on a calibrated monitor on the client end, they're going to have a decent calibrated monitor as well. And that's a luxury, again, most people don't have. One of the ways that's being tackled, again, this tends to be Final Cut 10, and I know most people are probably Adobe users in this group, but the plugin Color Finale has added what they call Connect. And it's kind of similar to Drive in that you send the project to the other person and it's caching material. So as somebody works on a frame and doing a color correction, it updates on the client system as long as they've got that plugin installed. And you give them it's like a Zoom session. You create a session and you give them a login and so on.
Yep.
And the interesting thing about that is, in theory, if both parties have, a fairly recent iMac or iMac Pro in that environment, that's a very color managed system.
Mhm.
And Apple, where everything internal is Apple hardware, Apple OS, Apple NLE, the color management to the viewer is correct. And therefore, the colorist working at his end can be reasonably assured that the customer is seeing what he's seeing or she's seeing. Right?
Since you're talking about color, what do you have to say about our home offices now with paint wall colors and everything else? What is sort of just a basic rule of thumb to say do's and don'ts in the home office?
Well, obviously, everybody's lighting is going to change their perception of what the screen looks like, color temperatures, and so on. So, first of all, if you're going to turn an office into a permanent edit suite, and it's not just by necessity because we're doing it today, right, is you kind of want neutral gray lighting environment. You want proper white balanced lighting If you're really doing it as a grading room, DaVinci Resolve, Premiere with Lumetri, however you're set up, and you're doing it to some sort of an external display, you really want a decent display. Doing color correction based on your computer monitor's viewer is not going to give you accurate color. Generally, like some of the high-end LGs are a good choice if you're not going to go for, a Flanders or a Sony or, something really expensive.
Ryan, Ryan, just real quick while you're there, the blue room and Ryan, that wouldn't work, right? So what about monitors? What do you guys color correct on? What are you guys using right now to do color?
Well,
No, I'm asking Ryan real quick.
Yeah,
Just have Ryan jump in and see if he's got.
Yeah, so we've got a couple. It kind of depends on who they are and where they are. I've got a Flanders that we pass around, and then I'll pull up the name of the other one. We just got a really nice new one about a year ago that has self correcting, like so overnight it recalibrates. And then we just have some, I believe they're the Dell Ultra Sharps.
Yes.
Just kind of recommended by Shane Hurlbut. So we've got a couple of those as well. So we kind of have our number one, which is in the main edit suite, and then the Dell Ultra Sharps, and then the Flanders, which can move around.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I was going to say that, like, Apple devices, to me, whenever I was color correcting, and a client would be sitting there with their Google phone, and they're saying it looks green, and the other person would have their Samsung, and it would be magenta. I would say, just look at my iPhone. It looks right. It looks like what I'm seeing on my calibrated monitor, or darn close.
Yeah.
So when I send you a still image, don't look at it on your Google phone. Find someone who has an iPhone and let them look at it on that. At least you're going to be closer.
The iPads are probably right now sort of becoming the lowest common denominator. It's like in audio mixing, everybody used to have the Oratones, which were the,
Oratones. I remember those. We called them awful tones.
Yeah, exactly. And that was the, if it sounds, acceptable on those, then it's going to be good everywhere.
Yeah, it sounds good.
The iPad's kind of the same thing. But
what about Surface Pro real quick? So like anything Windows, so Surface Pro, is that like not even close, or is that better? Is it getting closer?
I have not seen one enough to judge the color on it. I've seen some of the Surface laptops, but I haven't seen a Surface Pro. So
yeah.
I don't know the answer.
I agree with you on the iPads, though. I'm glad you said that because, that's my instinct too, is look at it on my iPad. It's pretty close.
But one of the things to be mindful of, especially when you're working with any of the newer Apple machines, is they add, ambient color, and they add True Tone, whatever the brand name is. Turn all that stuff off, right? Yeah. It's great if you're a consumer and you want to keep your, keep the white down when it starts to get darker in the evening, that sort of thing. But it changes the color temperature and so on. The other
I'm hoping if you're getting into color that you're thinking about these things, and hopefully you're digging for those things. You know what? I found one the other day, and I think I posted this on the cow. The accessibility has a thing in there that was doing something with gamma. And I don't know what it was doing, but it was blowing out the whites. So these light little gray lines that I could see on one monitor, I couldn't see on the other. And these are the Dell Ultra Sharps. And I was like, this does not make sense. Where is it? And I dug in there, and under accessibility, there's a display thing, and I can't remember what it's called, but it was like clipping everything horribly.
Yeah. Huh.
So
interesting.
Yeah, that was not where I thought I'd find it, but that solved my problem. I said, okay, these monitors aren't junk.
Well, I mean, one of the things I recommend is still, use color bars, right?
Yep.
Even if you're doing something on an iMac and it's pretty decently color managed, at least in the Final Cut 10 world, you still have user control over brightness. And if you've got it set really dark, things like the good old-fashioned plooge on a standard, color bar pattern are going to just be all black. You won't see any definition to the bottom end of that screen.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, use things like bars to calibrate your monitor and so on. Other things, obviously, is audio, right? So you want to have decent speakers. You don't want to always mix on headphones or the computer speakers or anything like that, because each one of those things gives you a different representation of what the mix is going to sound like. So, it doesn't have to be the world's most expensive speakers, but, a decent set of two-way bookshelf speakers or bigger.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Audio Engine. They're made in America. They're a beautiful little product. Great sounding for their size. They have like little tiny ones, and when you receive them, very well made. The packaging shows that they care about their product. Big fan of Audio Engine. Absolutely love those guys. If you can't afford Genelex, which everybody wants.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things, just to kind of get back to the remote thing, there's two other things I wanted to mention, and that is in the shared storage world, one of the things that I think every manufacturer is working on or already has some kind of a product is the ability to actually deal directly. So unlike something like, TeamViewer or the HP solution, where you're going into another workstation and then going from that workstation to your shared storage, you're actually connecting direct to the shared storage that's sitting in your office. So if you have a LumaForge Jellyfish, they have a remote access product. I think QNAP and Synology have similar sort of products. And it essentially allows you through a VPN to mount that volume on your home machine as if you were in your office. So for all intents and purposes, you're looking at your shared storage. Now, you're still limited by the internet connection, right? So you're not going to get the performance over the internet as you would through a 10 gig E connection in the office.
Right.
But you have at least access to move files around.
Yep.
Now, granted, if you're going to do something with a file, it's still essentially got to come to, the path is through your machine back over the internet and back to being recorded on the drive. So,
and that's different than accessing your computer and controlling your computer like they have like that. You're talking about just like you said, mounting the drive, which is that's a valuable thing to do sometimes. I don't need to control the whole computer over there.
right.
I need to get that hard drive on my desktop so I can, like you said, move a file over, do some encoding. It's a great task. Just like
Well,
encode.
one of the things you got to figure is that any shared storage system has a server built into it. So you've already got a computer there that you're talking to. The thing is,
Rob's back. He lost his internet for a couple minutes there in his whole house.
But so what you end up trying to do is control that computer. But the thing is, that computer is usually talking some form of Linux or something else. So it's not Mac. Well, these various companies are now adding utilities. I just got a press release today from the LumaForge folks that they've added a partnership with Kyno, Kyno, which is an asset management software. It's a great software to have on your system and allows you to look at files, and it has built-in encoding. And
so it's like Cat TV, but lighter than Cat TV because it's not really. Yeah.
Yes.
Like it. I haven't heard of it.
So what that allows you to do is basically command a transcode that happens on the server without having to like go through your machine and then back to the server.
Yep.
So let's say you go on a shoot, you do have somebody go in the office and copy everything to your shared storage. Now from home, you can command it to generate proxy media. So you've got something lighter weight to edit with while you're connected, and doing this all directly connected to the shared storage.
Yeah,
So
that's pretty nice. Rob, I know with Patrick, you know, how many times we move drives around. He always wanted to do it in the cloud, and it's very difficult to do it. Still is.
On the
Um,
last job I did with Patrick, actually just last month, he used Frame.io for the first time,
oh yeah,
and it
yeah,
was a revelation for him.
well, what people don't understand is you may have a super fast internet connection. It's completely irrelevant because where you're going to also has speeds throttling it. So for example, we use Frame.io for review and approval, but our customer uses a service called Widen, which is a cloud-based asset management solution that is used a lot in corporate and ad agencies and so on. Our upload speeds to Frame.io are relatively fast. The upload speeds to Widen are absolutely glacial.